Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, including the last of them all, the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. As I greet you with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, a greeting of peace from Ilford in London. On this, the 25th day, oh no, this is for me in Trinidad. You in London will be different. For me in Trinidad, it'll be the 25th day of the month of Rajab. For you it's different, yeah. And we begin with this dua that has come from our Prophet, Allah's blessing be upon him. Allahumma barik lana fi Rajabin wa Shaban wa baligna Ramadan. O Allah, kindly grant us blessings in Rajab, the month of Rajab, and the month of Shaban, and grant that we might live to reach blessed Ramadan, inshaAllah. Our topic today is one of supreme importance, the Quran and inflation. And of course we will have to define what is inflation, and to do that properly we also have to define what is money in Islam, what is money in the Quran. And at the end of the lecture we're going to have to respond. How should we respond to inflation? And I hope I have an audience today here in London who is prepared to talk and to offer your views. And when you offer your views, the whole world will be listening, because the lecture will go on the internet and people from many parts of the world would be listening. And you might be able to offer a view on the subject from which I also would benefit. But before we begin our topic on the Quran and inflation, let us thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one God, for helping me to arrive in London, to arrive in England on this. It could be the last time that I travel. The war in Ukraine, of course, has reached a stage now where people who support this side or that side are in danger. And I was not certain whether I'd be allowed into Britain, but I had no problems, alhamdulillah. And I also want to thank, and they will be listening in other parts of the world, those who have helped me with my travel expenses, because the price of tickets is going up, the price of hotel rooms is going up, and so on. And those who have assisted me, may Allah bless them. I also want to thank my student Hisham. It's the first time he's organized a lecture. In the past we had others who did the organization, and may Allah bless Hisham. This is the first lecture of a tour which will last for many months. I leave I leave London on the day of Jummah, which is Friday, for Edinburgh, and there we'll have a lecture that evening on such an important topic. The subject is Khidr alayhi salam, and the new model of scholarship, Islamic scholarship in Akhir Zaman. We have to ask the question, why? why has Islamic scholarship failed in such a significant way at this time? What is wrong? Why is the Darul Uloom no longer producing the scholars who can understand the reality of the world today and who have the capacity to go to the Quran, to locate that with which to respond to the awesome challenges of the world today? So that is the topic in Edinburgh, and then I go to Glasgow and we grapple with this topic, an Islamic eschatological analysis. Eschatology, the study of the end time, of the origin and destiny of modern Western civilization. If it is Islamic, we have to go to the Quran. What does the Quran say about modern Western civilization, about its origin and destiny? And why is it that we don't have scholars of Islam who are doing this? What's wrong? And then I leave Glasgow to go to Inverness, the masjid in Inverness. I think the topic is on money and Islam, similar to today's lecture. And then from Inverness I'll go to Manchester, and I'm going to spend 2 weeks in Manchester. We're trying now to organize lectures in and around Manchester before I leave to go down to Birmingham. And in Birmingham we take up Ukraine, an Islamic analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war. I am not a military analyst, so I'm not going to offer something I don't have knowledge about. But I'm going to offer an Islamic eschatological analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war in Birmingham. And then I want to come back to London in time for Ramadan, so you and I can go and look for the moon. Unless, of course, you're one of those very strange people who live in London, but your moon is in Saudi Arabia. Very strange. They're living in Britain and the moon is in Morocco. Very strange, yes. So we spend 1 week in London here at the beginning of Ramadan, and I get a chance to have iftar with you and so on before I go elsewhere in Britain for Ramadan, and then I remain until the day of Eid. And the day after Eid I fly to Armenia. And the 24th of April is the big day of Armenia because it commemorates the genocide, when a people who had lost all contact with the Quran, they had lost it, committed this atrocious genocide of the Christian people of Armenia. More than probably 1.5 million Christians were killed by Muslims who had lost contact with truth. That looks like my phone. We have to turn it off. Turn it off, yeah. And from Armenia I'll go to Brussels and then to Rotterdam. We have a good program in Rotterdam, and then to The Hague and Amsterdam and Frankfurt, and then to Malaysia, and then I'll come back to Macedonia and to Albania, and then come back to Britain, and it's going to take about 7 months. So may Allah give me the strength to be able to do all of this traveling. It might be the last time that I travel. So now let's turn to the Quran and inflation. And I think you are probably already aware of the definition of inflation. In a free and a fair market, prices rise and prices fall based on demand and supply. When the demand increases and the supply is not enough for the demand, the price goes up. When the supply increases more than the demand, the price goes down. This is a free and a fair market. But when prices are only going up and up and up, not up and down, then that is inflation. And it didn't come to the world for the first time with the modern Western world. We used to have gold and silver coins as money. And then the king or the Raja or the government will then try to stretch the money. How can you stretch the money? Number one, you can stretch the money by diluting the amount of gold in the coin, introducing alloys into it. And as people begin to realize, because the weight is changing, then the money is losing value and the prices will rise. The other way was you chip the coin. So the weight of the coin becomes less. And not every transaction is one in which you'll be able to go and weigh the weight of a coin. By the time you finish the transaction, you've been ripped off. The gold coin has a little less gold it's supposed to have. So these were the ways in which inflation took place in the past, because of the corruption of the money, either through diluting the gold in the money, the silver, or by chipping the coins, making it less in weight. And prices will then rise, keep on rising, because the money was being corrupted. But the present inflation that we now have in the world, around the world, has come not because of the corruption of money as it was done in the past, but because of a different kind of corruption of money. And in order for us to explain that this is a corruption of money that we now have as money, we have to turn to the Quran as our primary source of knowledge. And the Quran declares of itself, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإنه لحق اليقين, that this book has absolute truth. Once you recognize it as the word of Allah, then whether you understand it or you don't, whether you are comfortable with it or you are not, you have to bow down and submit to it. There are some today who have difficulties because the Quran declares plain and clear. Of course, the Pakistan National Assembly doesn't know it. The Quran declares plain and clear as daylight, there are only two genders, the male and the female. That's all. And so those who are pursuing an agenda of a third gender would find it a little bit uncomfortable to respond to the Quran. But the proper, if you are a Muslim, is once you accept that this Quran is the word of the one God, then whether you understand it or you don't, whether you're comfortable with it or you are not, this head must bow in submission. Otherwise, you're in trouble. You're not a Muslim if your head does not bow in submission to the Quran, meaning you accept the Quran to be absolute truth. And so when we turn to the Quran now for a definition of money, and we can't deliver a whole lecture on this subject. I have been lecturing on this subject maybe 25 years now, and I failed. 25 years of effort, and I have failed miserably in convincing my peers, the scholars of Islam, of my view. The surah of the Quran, which is the surah par excellence of the end time, is, which you know, Surah Al-Kahf. And it is the surah that you recite for protection for Dajjal. And it is surah which introduces the subject of Gog and Magog. And it is a surah which has money in it. That the young man stood up in a state of defiance of a godless world. They were not scared for their job or their green card or their legal status in Britain or their business and so on. That didn't count for them. They had hearts which were pure. And the heart was in submission to Allah. And the supreme loyalty was to Allah. Not to your job, not to your business, not to the government. And so they proclaimed the truth in that godless age. And of course they had to flee. Like our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, had to flee. When you stand up for the truth, you're going to have to flee. When you stand up for the truth, you're going to have to flee. But of course there are those whose hearts are corrupted. They don't want to leave. So they prefer to betray the truth so they can continue to remain. These young men fled and they stopped at a cave. And remember, they had a dog with them? So a dog has a very important role to play in the end time. And so when we look for the corruption of money in the world today, the explanation for that money, corrupted money, lies directly here in the modern West. And it started with Britain. It started with the creation of the Bank of England, 1690 something, I believe. If you are a resident in Britain, don't waste your time. Study this subject. Study this country. If you are a resident here, study this country. There's much knowledge to be learned that will explain the world today if you study this country the way it ought to be studied, not the way they want you to study it. What Britain did was to turn away from the British pound, which was a gold coin. That's right. The British pound was a gold coin. And to gradually replace money with intrinsic value over a period of time, replace it with money with no intrinsic value. Once money has no intrinsic value, it's bogus. It's fraudulent. It's haram. there are those of you here who might be interested to now study international monetary economics. I studied it at 2 universities, but I came out of the classroom different from the monetary economists, the fellows who become governor of the central banks and usually end up working for the IMF. I came out of the classroom different from those fellows because I had the Quran with me. I could recognize that if you print paper and you print a number on that paper and then you assign to that paper a fictitious value, and then you recognize it as legal tender, then that's fraudulent. You should go to jail for that. Because you're creating wealth out of nothing. And then you take that pile of paper, that's all it is, paper, and you buy all the oil that Saudi Arabia is selling. You're getting it free of charge. If you can understand it, how come the fellas in the central banks don't understand it? How come the politicians don't understand it? That they're actually ripping you off. And then when we say, well, if you could make money out of nothing, well, why don't we also do it? So Pakistan says goodbye to the Quran. Yes, goodbye to the Quran. And we also now will print paper and put a picture. And when I arrived in Pakistan as a student in 1964, Pakistan was just 17 years old at that time. And $1 US was valued at 1 rupee and 75 paisas. And when I had to take the bus from Paposh Nagar to Sadar, because you can't afford to travel by taxi, you're a student, you couldn't even afford a rickshaw. The price of the ticket by bus, they call it chawanni. Chawanni means 4 anna. Chawanni. And I think it was 16 to make 1 rupee, 4 anna. And if you want to go and come back, it's a tanni, 8 anna, half a rupee. Okay? And you wanted to buy a kilo of mangoes. You know Pakistan has the best mangoes in the world. So a student wanted to taste the Pakistani mango. And you could buy 1 kilo of very nice mangoes for 1 rupee, 1 rupee 50, 1.5 rupee. And I went back to Pakistan last year, and a kilogram of, now they call it VIP mangoes, 150 rupees. Huh? But when you're traveling now, you need to keep some money with you when you're traveling. You can't keep Pakistani rupees. You can't keep Bangladeshi taka. You have to keep their money. You have to travel with US dollars or euros or British pounds. And of course the Singapore dollar is still holding its weight. So they have something called hard currency. It's not just that they're ripping you off by printing paper and using it as money. and buying whatever on free of charge, but they are perpetuating the rip-off, making it a permanent system by ensuring that their money becomes the money of trade, the money of travel. You can go to Lower Manhattan with a suitcase filled with rupees, Pakistani rupees, you can't buy a cup of coffee.